Chapter 22. The Journal of Clayton Marcells. December 6th, 2049. I was watching as they made their way down the hallway when I felt the first indication that the intoxication of the mushrooms was wearing off. There was a pulling, disoriented feeling which came over me as I began to feel less a part of the scene I was watching, and gradually more singular and separate from the events. The awareness of being a mind without a body was terrifying, as I was overcome with what I can only describe as existential vertigo, like being suspended over an abyss and on the verge of plummeting in limbo. I fought against the dizzying, nauseous gravity which was intent on dragging me back to a firmer, more secure state of consciousness. They were making their way through the throng of twisted, tormented souls towards the stairwell to the basement. At this point, immediate intuitional information was lost, and I could only view events transpiring visually. They descended down the indigo-lit stairs as the occasional spirit would viciously lunge, only to be struck back by Nico's searing blade or frozen in Doug and Reggie's paralysis. At the bottom, they crouched by the door and waited as Dee flung it open and they entered, preparing to obliterate all in their path with gunfire. What they found was a wide series of basement rooms which had been crowded with much of the hospital's stored equipment. Most of it had been uncovered and used for sickening purposes for what had probably been months. However, by the reaction of the group, I could guess that the entire area stank of decay and slaughter. Everywhere there were operating tables, on which there were heaped the bizarrely disfigured bodies of uncountable victims, but of the living, there were none to be found. In the largest room, there was constructed a massive computer monitor and a circuit board attached to what appeared to be a power receiver resembling a transformer for electrical current. Slumped in chairs at different monitors were the lifeless bodies of distortionists. The group examined them and found them to be dead of an apparent mass suicide. Pandora was not among them, and nowhere to be found. She had apparently escaped. Nico quickly began trying to reboot the computer, but found all the files erased. The others hurriedly began detaching the motherboard from the system and collecting data files from the hard drive in hopes of restoring the encrypted information. They found the runaways dead in a back closet. Pandora had acted quickly and shot them all before her departure. After salvaging all that they could find, Dee placed a small packet of explosives at the base of the receiver, and they made their way out before detonating the bomb and leaving the entire hospital burning behind them as they left. The pull was too strong, and I at last lost my grip on the scene within the ghost world. The light around me now enclosed all in my vision as I was jerked upward into a void of blinding blue-violet radiance, and I felt torn and raw with a distinct impression of being thrown through space like a jet reaching subsonic speed. I could still sense Harris nearby as a screaming, terrified spirit lost in panic and aphasia. Desperately, I attempted to reclaim some connection with the physical, but material reality still eluded my shattered and incomprehensible state of complete non-perception, and as the last thin vestiges of my sanity collapsed, I began to feel the first fiery traces of distant, sparking nerve endings in the form of a blinding oblivion of pain as I collided with the vessel of my body, as if dropping into a teacup from 10 miles in the sky. The effect was one of plunging into loathsome, undulating flesh, bubbling in a cauldron of soupy, primordial mire. At last, I had found my body. I was fighting for consciousness, but my head was ablaze with piercing agony, and despite my effort, I could not open my eyes. I could hear events transpiring around me as if from a distance, but I was helpless to awaken and take part. I could hear the anxious, concerned voices of the 3 men as they examined me in my stupor. "Holy shit, is he still alive?" Bill's voice was horrified and guilt-ridden. "He's hemorrhaging," Dylan answered with a pained response. "How's Harris?" "He's disoriented but fine," Rodney responded. "We've got to get Clayton to a hospital." As Bill spoke, I began to hear a distant humming, which I soon realized was the sound of multiple helicopters flying in from the distance quickly. "No, not now!" I heard Dylan yell, as the rapid drum of machine gun fire echoed from overhead. "We've got to get out of here," Rodney exclaimed, as the powerful wind from the whirling blades fell over me. "We're not leaving him," I heard Bill roar, and felt strong arms lift me from the ground. My eyes flickered open, only long enough to see the blinding glow of searchlights overhead as I was carried down a path from the campsite. The intense pain once more forced my eyes closed, and then I heard the unmistakable sound of a van door opening and doors slamming shut. I heard an engine start and the slide of tires over gravel as the thud of bullets piercing metal rang out inside the vehicle. "God damn it! He's bleeding from his nose and his ear like a stuck pig. The implant's got to come out." Harris's voice was weak but commanding. "Sorry, but brain surgery is not in my repertoire of skills," Bill shot back as the van seemed to become weightless for a second before crashing down onto the road. "Just hold on, Clayton," Harris said in my ear. "We're going to take care of you." His voice was becoming far off and inaudible, as if I were sinking into a pool of bottomless dark water. I lay in silence for what seemed an eternity, and then there was light. Ghost light. The world was a vast and featureless wasteland around me, bathed in soft indigo and enshrouded in the thousands upon millions of spirits that whirled in a hurricane of bodies and faces in the purple sky. I was back in the vortex. I was standing alone in the desert of dreams, and the only landmark was a house, which waited some 100 yards from where I stood. With no other option, I began walking towards it. And as time and space were illusory, I stood at the steps leading down from the open front doors in a fraction of a moment. I stared for a time at the massive structure and felt as if I knew every window and balcony as well as the flesh of my own mortal body. The house was a monster of conflicting architectures and design. It was both ancient and modern, constructed to fit the whims of its owners and little else. It resembled a southern mansion built in Greco-Italian, but at the same time brought to mind some European castle or schloss. It was beautiful and hauntingly terrifying simultaneously in its looming, surreal power. As my foot fell upon the first step, I saw a ripple run over the image like a brief wavering static shift in its material presence, but this passed as I continued to climb onto the porch and passed through the entrance. I walked through the large anteroom into a great chamber whose centerpiece was an ornate staircase which ascended to a circular walkway on the second floor. To my right was a vast study with walls lined with shelves upon shelves of collected volumes and a great fireplace, which, burning, might warm the entire chamber. Long sitting tables sat before the windows where one could spend hours perusing the books from the wall in the light of morning. To the left was a great dining room with a table that could easily seat dozens in the center of a spacious white tile floor. Over my head was a spectacular chandelier which sparkled with hundreds of shining, tranquil crystal ornaments in 7 descending rings. The house emanated knowledge and nobility, but beneath it all was a darker, sinister spirit of secrets and deception. Neil Kenny stood at the top of the staircase dressed in a casual dinner jacket as if he had just got home and was preparing for a night of relaxation. He looked down at me and smiled grandly as he held out his arms as if preparing to embrace me. "Mr. Mercells, I am so glad you come." He began walking down the red-carpeted staircase, now casually placing his hands in the pockets of the coat. I said nothing, but only watched the ghost, which appeared as solid and real as any living man, as he walked from the bottom of the stairs and stood but 3 yards from me. You have no idea how long I've been waiting to bring you here. But the time had to be just right, you know. He laughed, as if amused by some private thought. You mean I had to be almost dead? I said coldly. Oh, almost dead. My friend, you are as good as gone. He chuckled as he removed his hand from his pocket and smoothed it over his thin, graining hairline. A few more hours, and I fear you will be pushing up the proverbial daisies. The question is, what happens after that? What do you mean? I mean, once you kick the old bucket, you're going to end up here in this god-awful vortex unless we do something about it. People die all the time. It's part of how life works. Yes, that is true, and I know it better than anyone. However, when you bite, it will have ourselves quite the little country. How's that? Mr. Marcells, or should I call you Andrew? Don't play the fool for me. There is no need. You see, I know who you are, or where, so to speak. I think it would be beneficial for both of us if we could just stop pretending and playing little games and cut right down to the core of your dilemma. What is our dilemma, Dr. Kenny? He began walking into the study, and hesitantly I followed, never taking my eyes from him as I kept a safe distance, if there was such a thing. First of all, he said, pouring himself a glass of wine from a bottle on a nearby table, let me begin by just saying that I am a great admirer of your work. I mean, the things you managed to accomplish in your past life are truly astonishing. And I think that this little hiatus of yours, although well-deserved, should really come to an end. You need to make a comeback, Mr. Marcells, and I think I am just the man to arrange it. Now, you've had your little fun running around with the bird people, and that's all well and good, but it's time to come home now, Andrew. Don't call me that, I said through gritted teeth as he smirked with conceit and sipped from his glass. Fine, whatever you please, but I need you to understand that I am dead, and I want to live again. Then reincarnate. I'm sure there's a slug or a leech or something about to be born that needs a slimy, skulking soul to jump into it. Now, there is no need to be rude, Mr. Marcells, but you have hit upon a certain point. I don't want to just be reborn. Yes, it was fun running around masquerading as a meat puppet and working my little hobbies on the side, but I'm capable of so much more. I am an artist, and I want the world to see my work. I want everyone to know that I am responsible for all that beauty. You call what you've done beauty. Surely you of all people can appreciate my work, my vision. I mean, it was you that called to me. You reached out for a kindred spirit. And there I was, more than happy to do everything that you required. Now it's time to fulfill your part of the bargain. I stared at his leering, hungry eyes and felt revulsion and horror welling in the pit of my stomach. That's not true, I said, with more pleading vulnerability than I wished to expose. Oh, come on. Are you still acting like you don't know what I'm talking about? He threw the empty glass into the fireplace and began walking across the main room and around the other side of the stairs. Come on, then. Let's play this out, if that's how it must be, he shouted over his shoulder with annoyance. With no other available option, I followed. A part of me wanted to believe that everything he was saying was all an outright lie, but deep within, I felt a need to know the truth crying out. He was waiting by a large oak door that was hidden behind a curtain at the base of the wall underneath the staircase. He turned the ornate knob, which was shaped to resemble a curled ball python, and opened it to reveal a long set of stone stairs which descended down into a long passage filled with utter blackness. He reached up and flicked an ancient electrical switch, and large antique light bulbs flickered on the inside of the stairway. Without a word, he entered and began climbing down the stairs. As I followed, I shivered at what seemed the impossible depth of the passage as we made our way down into a cold, subterranean tunnel. I stared down the long hall of ancient worn limestone and saw that it led to a single door at the very end. The door was constructed of ancient embossed wood bound in cold gray iron and appeared to have no visible device for its opening. "There it is," he said triumphantly, as he knocked against the door's thick, worn surface, which was carved with a multitude of archaic symbols and writing. A cold, like the eyes of death itself, was gazing upon me, fell over my soul and bit down over my heart with razor teeth as I stared at the portal. "What's in there?" I asked in a trembling whisper. Oh, I think you know," he said, laughing. "Then you are thinking wrong," I said, as I unconsciously took a step back. "I don't think so, Mr. Mercels. It seems more likely to me that you are simply adrift in a profound state of denial. I think the problem is that you cannot comprehend the mechanics of what I'm trying to tell you. This would all be much easier if you would just remember." He moved closer to me and took on the air of taking me into his confidence. He sighed and smiled as if to divulge some profound information entrusted only to me. "The very first time I ever flipped on one of those amazing ghost lights, you were there. A silent presence at first, but in time, you spoke and guided me. You told me all the things that had happened in the world which you conquered and destroyed. And you told me about the part of you that had escaped, the part that you needed back, and I agreed to help you. You were locked here, sealed in that very room, inside this house. This was to be your prison for all time. But by some fluke of convergent energy fields, it never passed through the vortex as all your enemies thought it had. It had become like a stone caught in the gears of a turning machine, and a wedge in the door between worlds. It is time for you to know the truth about who you really are. It began with a wealthy European couple in a distant, now wasted world." Chapter 23. The Testament of Neil Kenny. There were siblings, a brother and sister, born in the Ukraine to wealth and privilege. But, by nature or nurture, they had become twisted and incestuous. Their affair had begun in childhood, but was only discovered in their adulthood. The family, shocked beyond disbelief, and having considered the consequences if this sick union was discovered, arranged for the two to disappear into exile. They were given a substantial amount of money and sent to make their own way in the world, while being reported lost in a wreckage or at sea while traveling abroad to explain their disappearance. The two traveled through Europe under new identities as husband and wife. The brother made a name for himself as a painter of some renown, and it was during the course of these travels that the pair found themselves drawn into an ever-increasing study of the occult and mysticism. The two had sought to find some means of extending their lives while retaining their youth. It was in the ruins of an infamous monastery of the Black Virgin in southern France that they uncovered a text which explained in detail a complex ritual by which a person could negotiate terms of service with certain malevolent entities. And so the two set up residence in London and immersed themselves in the spiritualist movement taking place in the city at that time, intermingling with members of the Golden Dawn and other secret mystical societies under the name of Van Dulaver. As they were wealthy, young, and attractive, their origins were not questioned, and their lies accepted. After years of study and translation, they had finally arrived at the point of arranging the ritual and beginning what would be a long line of devastating events. The girl had become pregnant by her brother and gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl, whom they named Philip and Angelique. Calling upon a sinister demon from the earth's primordial past, they made a contract, and their fates were sealed. The conditions of their agreement was such that their own souls would be adjoined to the spirits of two inhuman entities, and then projected into the vessels of their young offspring, leaving their own bodies lifeless and their memories spotted and incomplete. In return, their aging would decelerate, and they would be possessed of numerous occult abilities. However, there would be a stipulation that to maintain their power and youthfulness, the ritual would have to be enacted again upon two of their own children. The couple, little more than adolescents, then made their way to America, where they would once more recreate their identities and begin a life in the southern states where they would become known as the Loves. There, in the backwoods of Mississippi, they would build themselves a mansion and begin a small criminal empire based on bootlegging and smuggling and the distribution of stolen art from Europe. All seemed well until Angelique's first pregnancy, which resulted in the birth of only a single child, a boy that they would name David. Knowing fully well that age was descending, albeit at an unnaturally slow rate, they next produced a set of twins, whom they named Andrew and Celeste. However, a new variable had been introduced into the working of their plan. Philip and Angelique had developed an attachment to their children, and had even spawned two more single births, a boy named Henry, and the youngest a girl they called Maxine. The two parents had become reluctant to commit themselves to the erroneous act of sacrificing their beloved twins. And, not being fully aware of what should occur should they choose to refuse the conditions of their contract, began searching for some other way to satiate the demon. They agreed that they would attempt the sacrifice of only one of their children, their firstborn, in hopes that the entity would allow them a bargain in turn. The ritual was an unparalleled disaster, and upon David's death, he became a wretched monstrosity, which turned upon its creators and destroyed them, leaving the other 4 children orphaned. They were eventually found by authorities, placed into foster care, and separated, with little hope of ever being reunited. In time, it would become apparent to the children that the curse had by no means ended, and they would be destined to the same fate as their oldest sibling upon their deaths, as revealed to them by the entity which still lingered in the depths of their nightmares. The oldest brother, Andrew, who had grown into a life of crime and dark arts, was the first to come to the realization that should he die, he would become a tortured abomination. It was he who retraced the family lineage and learned of the nefarious events leading up to his parents' arrival in the United States. It was he who came to the conclusion that the only means of escaping this curse was the locating of his twin and the reconsecration of their pact with the entity. He would be bitterly disappointed. His sister Celeste had grown to adulthood, raised in a normal, loving family, and even though aware of the fate which might befall her, and being far from willing to sacrifice her life, refused to bear children with her brother. Frustrated and desperate, Andrew was forced to find some alternate method of paying off the demon to which he had been bound since birth. His answer was simple and horrifying. He would pay the debt owed to the entity by sheer numbers. He formulated a plot by which he would force the curse allotted to him upon the people of the world en masse via a plague which would leave the world overrun with hideous, unnatural creatures. In turn, he and his sister mate would be purified and made the avatars of the demented spirit to whom they were enthralled. The problem, there were other people and entities which would act to obstruct the machinations of his plan. Upon succeeding in becoming the embodiment of the evil entity, he had become dependent on a cannibalistic diet which necessitated the constant devouring of human flesh. Even with the world almost destroyed, the other entities acted to preserve what humanity was left from Andrew's monstrous appetites, and he was left in an agonizing starvation. Adding to his hell, his sister had been killed, and now he was alone in his immortality. Insane and starving, he managed to find a portal into another reality. But the other entities of his own world would not allow him such an easy exit from his doom. He was trapped inside the ritual chamber within the house his parents had constructed, and sent back to the ruined world where he had brought his genocide. Or so they had thought. Chapter 24. The Journal of Clayton Marcells, December 6th, 2049. I had turned and began running back down the tunnel and up the stairs in blind confusion and terror. I could hear his laughter behind me as he called out, "Where are you going, Mr. Marcells? We still have much to discuss." As I stepped through the door, I was greeted by his still chuckling figure waiting for me in the center of the room upstairs. "Don't be so dramatic, Mr. Marcells. I'm sure this all comes as quite a shock. But you must maintain some level of dignity." "It doesn't make any sense," I shouted. "How could I be here now if he's still locked in that room? And I'm supposedly him. See? Now that is a good question. One that I pondered myself for quite a while. But one whose answer is not as intangible as you may think. You must take into consideration that there was, in fact, a third party acting on your behalf. And for the longest time, I could not comprehend who they were and how they had managed this amazing feat. That is, until I became gradually more aware of your little group of friends and the thing to which they are employed. I wondered if it were possible that someone, if they cared for you deeply enough, had managed to enter the chamber and separate whatever piece of humanity might be left in the avatar from what it had become, then allowed it to reincarnate free of possession in this reality. But who could have been capable of doing such a thing? Who would even want to? So I began to have my people collect information on you and these bird people from Savannah. I admit that I still didn't really understand until Sabin and Pandora managed to steal the Yamashita data. You see, Mr. Marcells, the good people at Yamashita on both sides of the vortex had been working together for quite some time, but their goals were ridiculously limited in scope. Their engineers never dreamed that someone working from inside the vortex could possibly gain a foothold on their operations. With the help of my followers, involving a few murders, some blackmailing, and a kidnapping or two, I managed to completely take control of their entire company. It was when I gained access to the Yamashita personnel records that I noticed the profile of a young woman working here in the Albright compound who had aided in a massive breach of corporate security. This Angelica Houston was on their most wanted list, but had mysteriously disappeared after your violation of the Yamashita mainframe. As I looked deeper into her file, I became convinced that there was much more to her in this part than the company had thought. And when I learned that she was present with you in Savannah, the truth of her involvement began to crystallize. The night that I met you in St. Louis, the police recorded that you had been aided in your escape by someone in a car that I traced to none other than Angelica Houston. The police report of your car chase indicated that the vehicle had vanished just a half-mile up the road from the pursuing officers. This same car was recovered in a field in Georgia where it was found by some hikers the following day. 2 people matching your descriptions checked into a campsite the very night you were reported missing from Missouri. I began to wonder if maybe this woman wasn't capable of some sort of teleportation. If that were true, then it would have been possible that at some point she might have entered the ritual chamber. Could she be the one who freed the soul shard, which would eventually become the person you are now? And if so, who was she? And finally, it was the spirit trapped within the room which provided the answer. I admit that my communications with the Avatar have been, at best, somewhat vague, but on this point, it was very clear. Celeste had come to rescue you from your curse. That was when it all began to make sense. Celeste had reincarnated here and then entered the vortex to set you free. Angelica Houston is the reincarnation of Andrew Love's lost sister, Celeste. No, I don't believe you, I said as I fell to the floor, weeping into my hands. This is madness. It cannot be. I felt Neil Kenny approach and place a hand in mocking compassion on my shoulder. It's okay, Mr. Marcells. His voice was empty and dead. In this world, she's not really your sister. Besides, from the way I understand it, you two are soulmates. You were meant to be together. And that is exactly what the Avatar wants. For you two to be together. Just as you were always meant to be. I threw off his hand and, crawling to my feet, ran to the great double door, only to find them slamming shut of their own accord. I fell against it and closed my eyes as I wished and prayed with every fiber of my being that I could just wake up from this nightmare and forget any of it had ever happened. You really disappoint me, Mr. Marcells. I find it hard to believe that the destroyer of a world is weeping at the door like an infant. But nonetheless, I still require your services. What do you want from me? I screamed as I hit the door with my fists and whirled to face the apparition. My first request is very simple and will require minimal effort on your part. Just die, Mr. Marcells. Give up this pathetic fight and just die. Why, even at this moment, the vessels in your brain are hemorrhaging blood, building pressure within your skull. Once you have relinquished your hold on the mortal coil, I will return you to your rightful place. And once you have rejoined the entity, I will release you. Then, if you wish, you can go find your little girlfriend, and you two can start all over again in a fresh new world with an army of ghosts at your disposal, and I will be your general. With the help of Ghostlight, we will conquer not just one reality, but dozens, if not more. He walked forward slowly and placed his hands on my shoulders. We will have so much fun together, my friend. Don't you understand what you're doing? The vortex is unstable. Even as we speak, it is tearing at the seams of space-time like a hungry tempest. You cannot control this thing for much longer. He looked into my eyes with the blank emptiness of one who is truly insane. Mr. Marcells, I don't care. Once I activate the towers in both realities, the ghosts will be unleashed, and I will bring the power of the vortex into every city and home. I will tear down the walls which separate one universe from another, and they will join like rivers, converging in an ocean of madness. It will be my greatest work, and then, from the ashes of the ruin, I will spend a millennia twisting and recreating life from the whims of my own mind. It was then that I felt a trembling in the solid door behind me, as the walls of the mansion began to hum with a subtle vibration. From the corner of my eyes I detected dark shapes dashing and fluttering at the windows of the house. Kenny released me, stepped back in stunned silence as he watched shadows thump against the glass with the indigo light of the abyss outside the door. "What is that?" he whispered as he peered at the large rectangular windows of the study. "I think they are birds," I answered, as I looked past Kenny at the semi-transparent image of my sister standing on the staircase, watching calmly as cracks began to form in the glass of the window frames. Thousands of them, Dr. Kenny. And if I'm not mistaken, I would wager that they want in. I'm sorry, but I can't help you. You see, while I was in the vortex the last time, I already agreed to aid another. Unfortunately, you failed to realize that I too am already dead, Dr. Kenny. I died in the van as we fled from your lackeys in Colombia. And when I died, I was at last embraced by the raven. I've brought him here, Dr. Kenny, and he is very interested in meeting you. We wondered where you were hiding, why the ravens couldn't find you in the vortex. But my dreams were giving me the answer all along. You were using the power of the house and entity to shield yourself within this place. Thankfully, you were kind enough to bring me here. You are right, however. One of us is going into that chamber, but it's not going to be me. Kenny's eyes were wide and terrified with unbelieving horror as the windows exploded and the room was flooded with the flapping, squawking forms of hundreds of giant, enraged ravens. They fell into a swirling tornado around the serial killer's spirit form and soon had become a pillar of ebony black feathers which reached to the high ceiling as he was lifted from the floor at its center, screaming and thrashing as his energies were tore and obliterated in the supernatural particle shredder. The cyclone moved to a spot on the floor over where I knew the secret ritual chamber to be buried. There, a small pinpoint of light shone up from the tiles and began to grow into a shimmering pool of radiant purple energy, rippling like a violet-hued mirror. I watched as the agonized, hysterical spirit was then lowered into the powerful energy field emanating from the pool, and in the next few minutes, as I caught the last glimpse of his clawing, reaching desperate hands and crying, pleading eyes, it closed over him. The house rumbled for a moment in a brief tremor, and then all fell silent but for the sound of the ravens as they perched on the banisters of the staircase and balcony in a still, somewhat pleased audience. I walked towards Barbara, and she towards me as we fell into an embrace. Together we cried in each other's arms until she gently pulled back and looked into my eyes, with her own now shining and blue with tears. "You did good, big brother," she said, smiling. "I missed you so much," I said, my words broken and shuddering with emotion. "I was always there, even if you couldn't see me. I wanted to tell you that I was sorry for not being a better brother, a better person. Clayton, you were never a bad brother or a bad person. You were just a person, a human being like any other. And everyone is allowed a little slack to be an asshole. Besides, it's not over yet. You're still my brother. Even though you had a better one before," I said with a pitiful sob. "Okay, now you're being pathetic. You can't be jealous of a past life if it's in the rules. Sorry, I didn't get the memo." "What do you mean it's still not over?" "We've got some loose ends to tie up, and you're on the cleanup crew." "Where do we even begin?" I said as I stared up at the army of silent birds, staring down at me expectantly with gleaming, dark, violent eyes. "The raven is going to give you a chance to set things right." "How is that even possible? I'm dead, remember?" "Yes, you are dead, and only the dead may travel." The members of the Savannah group were gathered around my body, where it was laid upon the round table used recently for the seance. Also in attendance at this informal wake were the 3 members of the musical group Direwolf and Professor Harris Levine, who wept openly in a chair by the fire. Angelica was at my corpse's side in a chair holding my cold, lifeless hand. She was pale, silent, and studied my face with a distant, bitter sorrow. "We should have just went to Mexico and got the implant removed," Harris said with disgust and anger. "He didn't want that," Dylan said solemnly. He wouldn't have taken that chance, Ryan said with pride as he stepped closer to my corpse and placed a comforting hand on Angelica's shoulder. It was our fault. We convinced him to go in, and we knew this could happen. Bill seemed lost in guilt and stalked about the room like a caged animal in blue jeans and a plain black t-shirt. He knew the chance he was taking, Angelica said with the cold numbness of the truly lost. What do we do now? Esther said as she poured another glass of bourbon and downed it in a single swallow. We do what Dee, Shaden, and the others are doing. We start attacking the compounds and bombing the towers before they can get them running. Jesse was studying the photos given to him by the three from Columbia with certain hidden hopelessness. We've got floor plans, and I think Angelica can get us in close enough to plant explosives. But it's going to be beyond dangerous. That won't be necessary, came a familiar voice, and all began to look at each other in confusion as they tried to ascertain its origin. Only Angelica and Ryan had seen the movement of my corpse's lips. Oh, holy shit, Ryan said as he fell back, dropping his wine glass to spill over the rug. Angelica was caught between amazement and joy as she felt the cold hand return her grip. She watched, weeping, as I began to sit up, and Harris fell from his chair in startled disbelief. I swung my legs over the side of the table and then, reaching up, grabbed the implant behind my ear and ripped it out like an engorged tick I had found in my hair. I stared at the bloody mass of wires and circuitry with amusement as I laid it on the table and stood on legs which had not moved for some 24 hours. Despite my state of unlife, I felt a remarkable and pleasant buzzing of energy in my chest, which flowed out through my limbs like a warm, tingling blood. I looked around at their open mouths and wide eyes with not a little enjoyment. That's all right, guys. Don't all rush to greet me at once, I said as I walked to the fire and, squatting beside the horrified Harris, warmed my hands over the flames. Clayton, is it really you? He said, leaning forward slightly and peering at the gaping wound in my skull. In the flesh, so to speak, I replied, and he fell forward, wrapping his arms around me joyfully as we fell on the floor under the inertia of his embrace. Be careful, I whispered in his ear. I'm a zombie and everything, so there's no telling what kind of germs I might be carrying. He looked up in shock and then released me with a certain amount of reluctance. I got up and found Angelica standing behind me. Her eyes betrayed a desperate need to touch me, but a dark sadness was resisting. Do you know? She said quietly. Yeah, I guess I do, I answered, as I studied the beautiful soft line of her cheek beneath her black hair. So how does that make you feel? She said impatiently as she began to wring her hands nervously. I feel grateful. I can't deny that the whole sister in a past life thing makes me kind of uneasy, but you gave me a chance to be normal. You saved me from that pit in hell, and now I've got to make some things right. I held my arms open and she fell into them as if diving to a warm ocean on a summer day. You're going to go away, aren't you? She whispered through tears that dampened my cheek. I'm going to put the puzzle back together now, and hopefully when it's all over, maybe there will be something left for us. But what if there isn't? She looked up with those eerie green eyes, and her breath was warm and fragrant with life and longing. Then we'll just take what we can get, I answered stoically as I held her close one last time before I pulled away. I turned to the other, still holding her hand in mine, as I said, I want you all to know that you gave me more than I ever could have deserved. Whatever I was and whatever I am, I want you all to know that you saved me. And now I am obligated to return the favor and try to give you all a chance at normal lives as well. What's normal? Ryan said with a laugh. Normal is a state of mind, Bill Miles said, slapping my shoulder and grinning beneath his long red beard. Then let me just give you a chance at something better, I replied. Christophorus walked over from where he had stood by Teddy and Esther and gave me a silent, knowing nod as he extended his hand. I shook it, and he said, God works in mysterious ways. I smiled back and replied, so does the raven, apparently. I turned and I stared at the empty dark of the hallway. In a moment, a dot of light appeared, growing until the portal shimmered bright and inviting. I kissed Angelica and walked towards it as I felt the gently welcoming pull of its force overtake me. After one last look at the gathered group, I waved goodbye and I entered.